Everybody, welcome to So Does It Matter, the podcast. This is our mostly weekly effort to give you an opportunity to meet and listen and talk with me to somebody who I think is making a difference in California politics. I'm actually kind of embarrassed that it's taken the better part of a year for me to have this guest on my show. There's actually a funny story as to why it's taken so long, but we'll get to that in the podcast. But John Park is my guest. He's the vice chairman of the California Republican Party. I've gotten to know John over the years. John is, like me, as a fellow Orange Countyan. John actually did a stint as the first vice chairman of the Orange County Republican Party before ascending to global domination at the CRP. And so I want you to join me in welcoming John Park. Welcome.
Thank you, John. I'm honored to be here with you today.
Right. This is one of those funny things where, in theory, we could be in the same place because John lives about 25 minutes away from me down the road, but I don't have a couch for people to sit on to do a podcast together. And actually, the irony about why John hasn't come on the show until now is that John aspires to have a world-class podcasting studio at his office, and he's bought all the equipment, he's done all the research, it's all waiting, but things keep coming up on the honey-do list and other things that have kept him from finalizing it. And what we were going to do, this is the honest truth, we were going to have the first podcast in his new podcasting studio be this. But I finally just said, John, eventually you're going to get to it, but I'm not willing to wait anymore. My watchers at So Does It Matter need to know who you are and what you do. So that's a true story. And so if we do another podcast and you actually see us in the same place, that means John actually did it. He pulled the trigger and he's got his podcast studio set up.
Thanks for pointing that out, John.
Hey, what can I do? So, John, why don't you take a moment and share with our folks two things. First and foremost, why are you a Republican in California and a party officer? What's wrong with you? What would possibly cause a normal person to want to do this? So talk to us.
Well, I think first and foremost, I'll say that I've been a Republican really all my life. I think even prior to being voting age, I've been a Republican. So there's nothing other than being a Republican for me. So that's an easy answer. But as far as why I'm involved in California politics, I actually got involved not that long ago. I was always a Republican, but I wasn't hyperactive as I am now. And I got involved actually in 2018, towards the end of 2018. A lot of people don't know this. And that's because that's when ballot harvesting was first introduced into California. And that's also the year that Orange County lost every congressional seat, during that cycle. So that actually activated me. So I got involved in the local party, started a local club, and then I guess I am now where I am.
What is it they say? The rest is history. But since I've had the benefit of talking to you for quite some time, let's go back a little bit further, because I think that maybe you started to get involved a little bit in politics when you were in school, and I think you used to spend a little time on Capitol Hill. So let's talk about the John Park of not California. So when you first got involved, you were living in your parents lived in Virginia, right?
Right.
So let's talk about that for a minute.
So we immigrated directly to Virginia from South Korea. I was 8 years old. And so I grew up really in Northern Virginia. Virginia at the time was actually very red. And so, during the teen years, I got involved. Ironically, she was a neighbor of ours, nice, great older lady. And she asked me and my friends to start volunteering at a local women's club. And of course, the prize or the pay was food. And, when you're 14 years old, that's good enough, right? And so we started volunteering. I mean, we were literally setting up chairs for their, monthly meetings. And they would always bring in a guest speaker like the clubs do nowadays. And, I was sitting in the back just listening. And I think that, as well as, of course, Ronald Reagan reinforced my republicanism, if you will, and my conservatism. And, I was hyperactive. I walked, called, I volunteered for people like Senator John Warner. I mean, back in those days, graduated with the government and politics degree.
From where?
And
Where'd
then
you go?
I went to George Mason University, which was a local school in, Northern Virginia.
I'm going to spare everybody a history lesson, but I could help host an entire podcast on George Mason. So I've
Right. That was after my time. I just want to say for the record. And, so, I was the CR president at the university. And then, of course, I graduated, went to the Hill, interned there, as well as worked as a very low level staffer, working about 20-hour days. I left shortly afterwards, got into corporate America.
Got into corporate America, and while it's not really relevant for this podcast, I can say that John then had a very successful, then has and continues to have a very successful run in the private sector. John is the owner and president of an advertising agency and does a lot of work in the private sector for a lot of major companies. But he also has fairly recently also started help using some of his skills and his contacts and his ability to help local candidates, right? So maybe talk about that for a minute. And, but this is not a sales program, but you could certainly tell everybody
Sure.
what website they could go to. I'll give you a hint because John does it as a hobby. He's not really hanging out a shingle asking people like, hey, can I help you get elected? But it's worth taking a look at. So go ahead, John.
Right. Right. Well, I think it's because I'm in the advertising and marketing field. Of course, my good political friends found out what I do for my day job. And as they run their campaigns, they've asked me for help. And, I did that for several years. It was really something that I was doing on the side as a favor to good friends. And then I finally said, okay, well, let's start a small division of my company called Genesis. Comes from Genesis and the word start. That's where the name is derived from. And, we started running some campaigns. Like I said, I've got no shingle hanging out there, like you said. In fact, I help very few select candidates, in every cycle, mostly local candidates, because that's really where my heart is. And I think that's where we can make the biggest difference, especially in California.
Yeah, so it's worth mentioning, by the way, that John and I are helping our friend Andrew Gruel, who is a Huntington Beach City Council
Right.
member, in his election. So that's a lot of fun because it mixes two things that are very important to John and I. It mixes politics and food because Andrew is a world-class celebrity chef. And so, as a matter of fact, I'll give you a little hint. I've got a podcast coming up soon that's going to be coming to you straight from Andrew's kitchen where we're going to cook up food while we cook up a conversation about politics. But
Nice.
John's such an advertising. So John's got 3 kids, and I would not be surprised at all if he's bought URLs for all of them. And they may not know that they're having websites prepared for each of them as they launch into the world, but I'm sure they're all there. John, let's move the conversation to talk about some things that are going on in politics. But I think the first thing we need to talk about is that this podcast is being recorded on the eve of the California Republican Party's endorsing convention, which comes up this
Right.
weekend. It's the I know about which I speak. Watchers of this program know I'm a former executive director of the state Republican Party myself. I spent 4 years as the vice chairman south of the party on the party's board of directors, and I've been to many, 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 many California Republican Party conventions. But this one going to be different. What's going on at this convention, John? What should people be looking for? I'll give you a hint, readers. There's a marquee item.
Right. Well, I think it's going to be an exciting convention. Of course, it's going to be I don't know, if you came up with an iconic example of a political convention, I think this is going to be it. And the endorsement convention, of course, the big, battle royale, if you will, between Steve Hilton and Chad Bianco is going to be on the main stage, both vying for endorsements. So there's going to be a lot of, you're going to see signs everywhere as you enter the convention halls and in the hotel, so the focus is going to be on that. I think that will, but of course, there's a lot of other things going on at the convention.
We can't move off of that yet.
Okay.
So I'm kind of thinking about this, and so you're gonna have a group of people that have always been with Steve Hilton, right? And those people are going to be like, for lack of a better word, MAGA charged now because the president endorsed Steve Hilton, and so they're going to be coming into the convention with some sort of combination of "we love Steve Hilton" and "you got to stand with the president," right? And then you've got the people that have been with Bianco because both Hilton and Bianco have spent over a year going around the state, meeting people, forging personal relationships. And when you forge personal relationships with people, endorsements matter less because you've made up your own mind and you've met these people. So Bianco's got a pretty strong base on the central committee. And then do you think there'll be people at the convention who might want to endorse neither? What would that look like?
Well, I think, John, this. Where that comes from was the possibility of a top two Republican candidate scenario in our jungle primary. And I think most will probably tell you that was a stretch. But, I think that President Trump's endorsement, a lot of people will tell you got rid of that scenario possibly. And so I think people are thinking that, okay, well, in order to preserve the possibility of a top two Republican candidate scenario, there might be some delegates that might say something like, let's endorse both. My inclination is that that's not going to happen. I think we're going to go to a vote either way. You have to clear 60% of the delegates there
So
at the
it's a high
convention.
bar. It's a
Yeah,
high
high bar.
bar. Plus,
So,
John and I agree on the same thing, which is you know who endorses both candidates in a race? Well, I'm not going to say the word, but it starts with a P. I mean, that's just not something you do. That's like wimping out, So boo on that idea. We don't like that idea. Before we talk about what else might be going on at convention, I want to take a minute. I probably should have done this before, but I want to do it now. If you're enjoying this content, if this is the kind of thing that you want to see me doing more of, one of the things you could do to help me, and in this case also help John Park and the party, is share this. You're watching it on, if you're watching it on Substack, there's a like button. It's a little heart. You can heart me. You can heart John. There's a restack button where you can click restack. That's like repost. It's you can put a little note. Hey, I enjoyed this. You'll enjoy it too. If you're watching it on YouTube, like it. You hear all about the algorithm, but they're true. When you like something, then people who follow you follow it. And of course, it'll be on Facebook. And anyway, if you would do all of that, that would be great. And then the other thing that I will tell you is that below this interview, you'll see some relevant links for things we talk about on this podcast. Among other things, there'll be a link to the California Republican Party. There'll be a link to Senesis, this blend between two words that is where John does his political work. And then also, I'll link to John Park's got a personal website. So I think you do, don't you? It's
I
got to be
do.
like, yeah. So John, what else is going on at convention? I think I saw somebody pretty well known is going to be headlining the convention.
Right. Well, first of all, it's going on at a great place, San Diego, right on the
Right on the
waterfront there.
water.
So,
Right on the
right on the
water.
water. So that's fantastic. And our headliner for Saturday night is Senator Ted Cruz. He'll be our main speaker. There are bunch of other sessions, but we're excited about having him, especially at a time where there's a lot going on in the country right now. So,
And
Senator
I
Cruz.
will say this as somebody who's been to a lot of conventions, there are people that maybe have a big name, but frankly are pretty lackluster when it comes to giving a talk. And so you leave going, that wasn't anything. Ted Cruz is an awesome orator. He was a great speaker before he went on the campaign trail to run for president. But, if you're crisscrossing the country, and he did this back in 2016, your speaking skills get honed. And so if you're attending that, it's going to be great. And if I know Ted Cruz, you'll see him around. He's the kind of guy that'll be like, "Hey, I'm going to speak at the dinner, but I'm going to go to the late night cigar caucus, and I'm going to go pop into the college Republicans." He's a retail politics guy. So very seldom does he'd have to be on a pretty tight schedule to get dropped off just in time to speak and zip out again. So I think that'll be fun. So if you're at
That's great.
convention,
It's good to hear.
and he loves to take pictures. So if you're going to be at convention, look for Ted Cruz. I think you probably find him. So
Right. But John, as the party vice chairman, I have to say that you should attend the dinner.
that's right. There you go.
Right, that's Saturday night, so, we welcome everybody there. We're also featuring we're going into obviously the June 2nd primary, so we're gonna be featuring at the convention bunch of our very own, local electeds in California, different sessions throughout the event. It starts Friday and our main, meeting takes place on Sunday morning, and, so it'll be a pretty jam-packed weekend.
Yeah, and to circle back on right where you started, if you have in your mind what the retail would look like at a convention, and it's not just signs and people wearing buttons, it's people watching at the ultimate level because all kinds of people come to these conventions. And sure, there'll be somebody having a rational conversation about who do you support. But for every one of those people, there'll be the person screaming. There'll be the people running through
Sure.
the hallways, just all the stuff you'd expect. And then interspersed in there are members of Congress, members of the legislature, other VIPs, talk radio show hosts, people. And the whole thing is just a big, I'll use this word in the best possible sense. It's a menagerie of craziness that is just, that alone is worth the price of admission. So it'll
Right.
definitely be a lot of fun. John, let's pivot this conversation a little bit and maybe talk about the three, I'm going to call them the front running Democrats. Obviously, the Democrats have a real problem on their hands. They've got 8, what they like to call well-known candidates running for the office, but Four of them are in the polling doldrums. Xavier Becerra, the former Health and Human Services Secretary for Barack Obama and former longtime congressman, is stuck at like 1, 2, 3%,
Hmm.
right? You've got Tony Thurmond, who is the state superintendent of public instruction, who is also dwindling at 1, 2, 3%. And in fact, he's having a particularly bad month because this guy has literally spent his entire career so far up the butt of the California Teachers Association that I think they just kind of view him as their tool, and yet they've endorsed someone else. So he's got to feel
Yeah.
pretty emasculated about that. And
Well,
he's
that might
running,
change, though. That might change. We'll see what happens
yeah,
when
we'll
the
see what happens.
supposedly the
And
other shoe drops.
yeah, you got Matt Mahan, and he's the only person with a kind of executive government experience. He's the mayor of San Jose, and he's running as, he calls himself a moderate Democrat, but we're in a time right now where I've never been in a more partisan time. I'm not sure there's enough of a lane for a moderate Democrat to do well. So in addition to Thurman and Becerra, we got Betty Yee is running. She's the former California state controller, and she's running as kind of the wonky numbers person. But again, she's not getting any traction either, and so she's in the doldrums. And then last but certainly not least in the doldrums category would be Antonio Villaraigosa, who's the former assembly speaker, the former mayor of Los Angeles, and he can't get above 2 or 3%, which makes the front runners for the Democratic nomination, as it were, Katie Porter, the former congresswoman from Irvine who represented John Park in Congress. He
Ugh.
must have a special love for her. And then we have Eric Swalwell, who's the congressman from the East Bay area, although it's unclear if he lives in the East Bay area. And then we've got Tom Steyer, the guy who made his $1 billion investing in companies that put an awful lot of carbon into the atmosphere and now is running as the anti-carbon guy.
The true progressive.
The true progressive. So, John, let's get your take on these top three. You pick the order, or I'll pick it for you. Talk to us about Tom Steyer.
Well, Tom Steyer, I think he's what, like 125 million in right now,
Right.
as of just a few weeks ago, I think. Just I joke that he said he's a true progressive because I mean, if you watch his commercials, which by the way, you can't avoid if you watch any streaming at all, and he professes to be the progressive. Of course, his history doesn't tell that. So I see him getting no traction. I see him just perpetually stuck. I mean, if you spend $125 million and is polling where you are when others have spent a few million, you've got serious problems. And the other two, Eric and Katie,
Well,
they're
hold on a minute. What we got?
yeah,
I get to chase you on these
sure,
one at a
sure.
time here. So, I think what I hear about Steyer is that while he has a very large campaign team around him because he can hire whoever he wants, he's really his own campaign manager. And I don't think he recognizes how strident and blustery he comes off in his ads. And I do think at some level, you're missing an opportunity to connect with voters when you are not able to demonstrate sincerity. You're not able to connect with people because you're so fired up in your ads that your cheeks are red and you're kind of ranting. And I think that there's an assumption on his part that people want like the Democrat version of Donald Trump and as he portrays it. Like it's a big tactical mistake that he's
Right,
making.
right.
All right.
Well, one thing about Steyer I want to say is that, typically when a billionaire runs or somebody that's done really well in the private sector, they run on that. They run on their business success and they run on the achievements of that. But if you notice his approach is that, yeah, I've made a bunch of money, but, because I think it doesn't align with how he made his money in progressivism or socialism, he has stayed away from talking about his own career, which is, very
Right.
ironic.
Right. You tell me. I mean, I'm trying to imagine a focus group that he can certainly afford to have focus groups where they came up with the billionaire that can go after the billionaires. Sounds to me like the lamest, most stupid slogan that you could ever come up with. But yet, that is one of the slogans he's using in his campaign. Let's talk about your close personal friend, Katie Porter. I'm saying that tongue in cheek. I suspect she is not your close personal friend, but
No.
so
So
she's a
so
phenomenon. Talk
unlikable.
about her, because a lot of people statewide don't have the perspective that you would have having had her as your member of Congress.
She's just so unlikable. It's just That's really the first phrase, and of course, she, shot herself in the foot with the way she treats her employees, former and current, and we all know about the viral videos of that interview, where she
Yeah, and to make
chastised,
it and to make it easy for
right,
you, linked right below, I'm gonna click on you can click a button below and watch a video of her dropping F-bombs on her staff for doing things as innocuous as walking through the back of her shot. I mean,
right.
it's really crazy, so I'll provide that video link, down
Yeah,
below.
well, when she was our congressional representative, the district where I live is pretty much split, right? Like 50-50, right down the middle. Well, at least when she represented it. And she was so partisan and so unlikable. And, she was practically, or I think she maybe at one time considered herself as a member of the squad. And this
She's a
is,
member of the House she was in the House Progressive, Caucus, I think she
yeah,
might have been an officer of it, so
okay. Okay, there you
and it's worth mentioning to statewide viewers why she's even a thing is, she in grad school or whatever was like an intern or an associate of Elizabeth Warren's. And so they're really, really close. And so Elizabeth Warren, who is a pioneer and a leader
yeah,
in online fundraising through, the Democrats' big fundraising website. What's theirs called?
blue with
Act Blue, or they're on
Act
Act
Blue.
Blue, and
Right.
so she has done so much fundraising for Katie Porter that Katie Porter has now raised tens of millions of dollars over the years from this online fundraising, which is kinda goes back to your point. She's raising money from all the people that haven't actually met her to dislike her.
Right,
And of course, she's made a cottage industry when she was in Congress about serving on these oversight committees and pulling out her whiteboard and attacking the CEOs of companies for whatever reason she wanted to come up
right.
with. I actually found that part to be, of all of the aspects of her, that was actually the most entertaining, to be honest with you.
Well, and also the beat up old blue minivan shtick that she constantly plays election after election.
Yeah, this is
You know,
right. She's the hard-fought single mom who plays the broke card while she makes hundreds of thousands of dollars
right,
a year now back on the faculty of UCI. She has a like, the university provides her subsidized housing, which conveniently she managed
right,
to keep while she was in Congress.
right.
So, anyways, let's pivot over. We gotta now pivot over to Eric Swalwell, a member of Congress. What are your thoughts on him, John?
Another so unlikable. I think that he is, I think the epitome of what we don't want in California. He would be just like Gavin Newsom, probably worse, in my opinion. And I think he would just be awful in many ways. I think that, his claim to fame is, TDS, right? Being on the opposing side for the impeachment trials and, against Trump. And so I think that he will just make public safety much worse, based on the stuff that he's campaigning in California. Affordability crisis will continue in California with him at the helm. We'll see. I mean, we'll see if they really align with him. Certainly the unions have, which is, great news for him in California. But, apparently,
Oh,
as you wrote about today, John, the other shoe is getting ready to drop. So we'll see what
right,
happens.
there's some fairly credible sources coming out saying he's gonna have a harassment allegation problem, and then, I'll foreshadow a column that's forthcoming. It's almost done, but I haven't finished it yet, but there's a reason why the unions have all circled behind Swalwell, which is this guy lives hand to mouth. He's no savings. There was a big investigative piece done in the Sacramento Bee that really detailed. I mean, this is a guy who they've spent they've had his congressional campaign reimburse their family for childcare
Childcare. Yeah,
expenses to
I
the
saw
tune of
that.
hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is a guy, imagine that your finances are so bad that you set your withholdings for your taxes to an artificially low number to keep your money because you got to have your money, knowing that ultimately when you pay your taxes, now you're going to have to pay penalties because you didn't have it pulled out during the course of the year. And it just goes on. And this is the model that the unions want because, and we're going to pivot for a moment here to Gavin Newsom. But, kind of the formula with Gavin Newsom is that Mrs. Newsom, the first partner, as she likes to call herself, Jennifer Seibel Newsom, she's involved with a couple of nonprofits that get all their money through the shadowy web of special interest groups
Right.
that profit off of state policy and state contracts, the unions, the utilities, and all these other people. And so if you're the unions, well, Katie Porter, she's just too ideological. She's not going to listen to anybody about anything. She's liable to tell us to F off, right? And Tom Steyer doesn't need their money. He's independently wealthy, right? No, it's Swalwell that's out of the textbook of we'll take care of you while you take care of us. But
Right.
let's finish up with a little kind of a quick hit on Gavin Newsom because I think it's important. What do you think? It seems to me like he's is doing a pretty good job of trying to ignore all of the problems in California as he's focused on running for president. And nearest as I can tell, the media is just letting him get away with it.
I do think they're letting him get away with it, but I also think it's because they have no one else. And of course, California, if you're reaching into the far, far left of the Democrat Party, Gavin Newsom speaks to that group. And I think that has played effectively well. But when you start getting down to the nuts and bolts of running government, and the policies that he's stood behind, spent money on, and has really delivered nothing on. A good example might be, like recently, I read an article about the impacts of the minimum wage rising when we took it to $20. And that effectively has resulted in a net job loss of 12,000 jobs in California, mostly in that demographic that he professed to help. Because we sped up automation, we declined on service, and of course the restaurants had to increase costs.
Hey, I pulled up to a fast food restaurant. I don't have to name what it is, but it might have sounded a lot like Carl DeMaio, but instead it was Carl. Okay, maybe it was Carl's Jr. And I had an entire conversation about my order, and then about halfway through, I realized I was talking to AI. And then when
Oh,
I went up to the window, and I'm like talking to the person, she's all like, "Yeah, about a third of the positions here have now been converted over to AI or other things because the owner said the franchise can't make any money with the wage requirements if they keep employing all people. It's unaffordable and they'd have to close, which is why the Carl's Jr. closest to my home in Yorba Linda, California is closed. They couldn't make
yeah,
it work under these finances because there was no ability to make a profit. I know that the left would like every enterprise, including fast food restaurants, to be owned by the state and there'd be no profit, right? Boy, could you imagine the awful food created by a government-owned fast food franchise that had no incentives to wanna make customers
right,
happy? It would just be awful.
right.
Anyways, I'll say this as a closing note on Gavin Newsom. We've got a homelessness crisis. We've got a housing crisis. We have high-speed rail crisis. We have a crisis of unpaid unemployment insurance debt. We have fraud in hospice care. We have fraud in cell phone use. We have massive amounts of money going out the door to provide benefits for people that aren't even in the country legally. All of this stuff is going on, and he's just ignoring it, and he's on the road with his holier than thou wife on their tour of America. And boy, if Americans take a look at what he's done here, they might not be so interested. This is the part of our podcast. I know it means that we're getting close to the end, and I know everybody wants this to be a 2-hour podcast with John.
Sure.
But John, if you've watched our podcast, which I know you have, this is the part where we call it our lightning round. And so that means that you're not allowed to expand upon these answers too greatly, or I will go right and I'll buzz you. That's my hockey buzzer voice. But we're going to ask you a few questions, and then we're going to sign off. And we really appreciate your time. So, John, what's the
Sure.
last book you read?
Well, I cannot tell a lie. I'm still working on it, but Friends Divided. It's about a book about, I don't know if you've read it, but it's a book about Jefferson and Adams and their friendship.
There you go. So, founding father time. That's great.
Mm,
What's the last film that you watched? And that can be a streaming movie. It doesn't mean in the theater.
right. In the theater, the late,
Okay, I watched that. I actually thought it was better than the previous one.
same.
Same. All right. And what
We
about at
have kids,
home?
so we go to
Streaming.
those movies.
What about well, and you have to watch a movie like Avatar on the big screen. This
Sure.
special effects. It's kind of funny when the Academy Awards, or maybe it was the what's the other movie awards that come out first? The SAG awards, maybe. The only movie that got an award that I felt like I saw was the cinematography award for the Avatar movie. So okay. Anyways, I'm the one that's stretching out the lightning round. What about any? What's the last movie you saw streaming?
Boy. And this is going to be kind of one of those no-brain movies. Nobody 2.
Nobody too. All right, let's talk about your favorite American president of all time. And as I always say, because I'm trying to get interesting answers, Donald Trump is exempted because clearly, obviously, he's everybody's favorite president, right?
Right.
But if you exclude President Trump, who would you say of all time is your favorite American president?
I'm going to go with George Washington.
George
And
Washington, the man who put his life, liberty, and property on the line, led a continental army that sometimes felt it was going to fall apart, and then ran a nation
right,
and voluntarily stepped aside after 8 years because he said, "We got rid of a king. We shouldn't have permanent leaders in our
right.
country."
Well, for me, he was reluctant to accept power and he was ready to relinquish power. That's a rare
Great.
commodity in politicians these days.
It is. And your least favorite American president of all time?
There's so many, John.
There's only one correct answer, but you go ahead. Give us your answer.
I'm just going to say in my lifetime, I'm going to go with Barack Obama because my answer, the reasoning for that is I feel like he divided us.
Well, that was certainly something that he did. Okay, a current world leader, again, Donald Trump's not eligible for an answer, whom you admire, maybe the most if it's one.
Okay. Well, there are two that's on my radar. One is the Prime Minister of Japan. Uh, I'm going to
The new
say is
one.
the new one, Takaichi. I hope I'm saying her name correctly. I think she's great. If she was an American, I think she'd make a great Republican, by the way.
Okay.
And the other one that's on my radar is the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Machado. I've been, as I always do when I start seeing these people in the media and I start admiring their work, I start studying up on their history and, doing the Wikipedia thing. And there are a lot of great things about both of those individuals.
All right. So this is always harder because you can only pick one. Who's somebody up and coming in California politics? And I gave John this question in advance, so he better have an answer. Someone who's up and coming in California policy or politics that we need to be keeping an eye on. And I'll give everyone the caveat. John's having a tough time struggling because if you're watching this and you're up and coming, he wants to name you. But I forced John to name only one person. So
Right.
probably somebody close to him.
Well, I think that, public safety to me is a good place to look at for leadership, especially in the times that we're in. I'm not sure if I would look at him as an up and coming person because I'm not sure if that is noted with age, but I think that I would like to see somebody that's a higher level of leadership might be somebody like Don Barnes, who is the Orange County Sheriff. And I think
Don's a
that
great
there
guy.
are, yeah.
You don't get to expand. It's the lightning round.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
Question. If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing in California policy to make our state better, what would it be?
Again, John, so many things.
Yeah, but
If
you
I
got to pick
could,
one.
I would I would remove all taxes that California has added onto our gases.
All right. So you would provide relief at the pump for ordinary people trying to get through life. So I think that's a great answer. And with that answer, we're going to have to unfortunately call an end to this podcast. My readers are really in their sweet spot if we're between 30 and 40 minutes. But if we get beyond that, they go wandering off to go watch other things. And so, John, thank you so very, very much for spending time. I'm looking forward to seeing you this weekend in your element at the California Republican Party Convention. I was a proud supporter of your candidacy for vice chairman, and I think it's going to be a great event and a great convention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.